I remember one morning I was sitting in the back of my dad's car awaiting my grandmother who had just landed in from Puerto Rico. We were parked near the JFK terminal, just waiting. I think we had to move because we were beginning to block some traffic. So we did, and a few moments later, the topic of conversation between me and my brother assumed the topic of games. Older games. He was talking about how our eldest cousin had owned a Sega Saturn. When I asked him what a Sega Saturn was, he told me. He said, yeah, Sega used to have their own consoles. Now, I didn't know what that would look like. Games only playing on Sega? What other games are there besides Sonic? I grew up in an era where Sonic the Hedgehog was a multi-platform juggernaut. Never did I think him and his lineage belonged to a family of consoles that, if still existing at the time, would have prevented me from playing Sonic in its entirety. We were pretty much Nintendo only, excluding the stray 360 popping out from the ocean of Nintendo consoles we chose to be loyal to. I was aware that these were what Sonic used to be at some point. But the notion of a missing game in the bunch captured my imagination, a game I never saw before on a different console. What did Sonic on Sega Saturn look like? This was so long ago, I must have been 5 or 6. 15 years later, I still remember the image that came to my mind. I imagined a single screenshot. Sonic and Tails were standing in the center as their Genesis sprites, and they were in a giant outdoor metropolis. More like a factory actually. Like chemical plant, but instead of yellow and blue colors, it was entirely purple. The sky was a dark yet desaturated purple, and the structures were even darker, nearing on black, the yellowish white moon popping out in the clouds. Sonic and Tails were unfazed, cartoonish of course, but they reached a dead end of some kind. A metal roboticized wall blocked their path to progression. Everything surrounding the two looked like a mix of the factories in Blade Runner and Fury 161 from Alien 3. Why did I think of this? I hadn't seen any of those movies yet. I hadn't known anything that looked like that. It just popped up. This must have been what a Saturn Sonic game looked like, right? I later came to the realization that I was dead wrong. In fact, there was no Sonic game on Saturn. No mainline one, at least. There was one planned for '96, but it got cancelled. Sonic Extreme. When I inevitably found out about this game, its aura frightened me and reminded me of why I prefer to stick with my modern 3D Sonic games. With the Sonic I was used to, I didn't feel uneasy. It felt grounded and realized. But something was always really off. And it wasn't Sonic's design. At least not completely. It was all that surrounded him. I'm gonna confess something. I'm a Sonic fan. A big Sonic fan. Sonic has been part of my life since I was born, purely because my brother was in love with the character since he could remember. I was privileged enough to have nearly every Sonic game at my disposal. A privilege I am now aware actually was a classic example of lucking out. The Sonic games I remember being far more interesting were the adventure era stuff. Sorry, it's just what I gravitated towards. The adventure era made a lot of strides in exploring Sonic's world, developing it and its lore to a point where now most of the stories that have come out since then are building off of what those few titles set forward. However, I wasn't dumb. I knew that somewhere along the line, things had changed. Sonic apparently had pure black eyes back then. Eggman looked like this, and there were only a few characters, like 5. If you want to count the Chaotix, that's completely fine, but still the cast was small. The environments looked like this. A stark difference to what I knew, and I chose to stay away from it typically. The way the Sonic the Hedgehog series from 1991 to 1997 presented its atmosphere and world through both its in-game art design and its real-world advertising was as a hellish fever dream. When Sonic was first created, he was an emblem of counterculture, a symbol of what was popular, desirable, and hip during the last months of the Cold War. A resentment towards authority was injected into the blood of the youth. If the Attitude Era of the WWE has taught me anything, it's that the 90s were the decade of the people. This is where all that alternative goth shit started ticking off. You know, my kryptonite. Nu metal was rising, and video games, through the immersive and interactive nature of the medium, became a full-fledged cornerstone of what defined the generation's interests. A slacker mentality, an apathetic, secular refusal of the establishment that came before it. I think a lot of advertising from the time would prove my point. Sonic was the kind of character a city dweller like myself would prefer over the blue-collar Mario. Sonic was just edgier. Nothing was too tough for him to challenge. And he straight up just didn't give a shit, the three-pronged silhouette exuding a sharper, dangerous, and belligerent personality. But let's make a distinction here. Sonic had two main marketing directions, the Japanese and the American, or let's say Western. The Japanese side of things kept everything really simple. The advertising never cared too much to portray Sonic as anything but a cute blue protagonist, but in the West, Sonic was a force, a completely different beast entirely. Here in America, and in the UK to a lesser degree, they wanted Sonic to be taken a lot more seriously. Let's ignore this exists for 1 second and go straight into what America cooked up for Sonic's multimedia interpretations of the games. Sonic SatAM and the Archie comics are pure examples of what I'm talking about in regards to the serious undertone Sonic would encompass through his time as a hot ticket item from 91 to 94. Here, Dr. Robotnik has taken over Mobius, and the Freedom Fighters need to fight back against the overwhelming odds to finally retake the planet from the evil Doctor's pollutive grasp. This is where we meet characters like Sally Acorn, Bunny Rabbit, Rotor, Anton. I don't fucking like Anton. I'm gonna be real with you. I'm a Sally Acorn enjoyer. You can take any other female Sonic character, and I don't really give a shit because she's the GOAT. For a lot of Americans growing up at the time, these characters defined what the brand was back then. The games, they didn't really innovate in terms of characters or lore. What did this new world of Mobius have in store for us? Realistic natural forests, a silence in the air, and an empty city. Robotropolis is a hollow, techno-gothic nightmare. It has no citizens, only robot slaves that work against their will in Robotnik's favor. There isn't much color here. It's pretty realistic, and if it weren't for the anthropomorphic characters, you'd realize that the world that's been erected here is one that's silence is louder than its suffering. Knothole is essentially the only safe house there is. Everyone else is gone, taken away. No one else is here. These quiet, unassuming, uncaring yet warm forests are the only remaining bastion of life other than the few dozen survivors lucky enough to escape Eggman. This world used to look nothing like it is in the games. It used to have a king. Sally Acorn is a princess. There is an entire Mobian history that viewers are seldom aware of. Sonic is barely important amongst the politics that had to take place in the coup that Julian prepared for Mobius and the Acorn family. You could argue that Sonic, Tails, and Robotnik are the only remnants left of the games they needed to adapt here. Everything else may as well be foreign. A dark, quiet place. Mobius has been dead for some years now, and this hedgehog is the only ace these ragtag fighters have up their sleeve. I can't speak too much on the comics, but I'm aware the general story outline is largely similar. Over in the UK, Sonic the Hedgehog had a different take on the same premise, sort of. Again, I haven't read it myself, but I did watch that Cybershell video hundreds of times. From what I'm aware of, it seems like the world in these comics is much closer to how the world was intended to look like and feel like in the games themselves. And in a way, I don't nearly feel as strange looking at them because of that. It seems throughout Sonic's time in the spotlight in the 90s, the lore and the worlds he inhabited, the ones he was given, were barren and destroyed. Worlds that either had all the life sucked from them, or didn't make any sense, like you were on a bad trip. This didn't go away concerning merchandise. On so many old Sonic products, there's this checkered void that appears on their packaging. It's only on Western items, I notice. The floor always being this never-ending red and yellow checkerboard. It goes on for miles. The sky a suffocating purple, the horizon being pure white, an endless void, where nothing happens, nothing lives, and nothing dies. A time loop. So many of them just have Sonic and Co. living in a formless hollowness, a vacuum, Sonic giving off the same exact smile every time. Many of these images were drawn by Greg Martin, a talented artist undeniably, but one that chose really esoteric and surreal environments to place this hedgehog in. Look at this one. Here, Sonic is doing the same pose he does every time. The floor isn't a natural expanse of nature. It's a shiny, marble-esque ballroom dance floor. A singular Greek pillar standing without purpose or function. A random loop-de-loop, random palm trees, a giant arrangement of mountains, probably some sort of island, and clear blue water filling in the landscape. Yet again, a dull, dusky, purple sky. Robotnik just floats there. What is this place? Why is he here? This isn't the only image to depict Sonic's world like this. This uneasy feeling I get looking at these extends to even the box arts of all these games. All of them just put Sonic in a bare bones fantasy world, an empty mess, a dead world. Barren, yes, but somehow still brimming with peace, with life, with plants, oceans, and shores. This isn't just present in irrelevant stuff outside of the games. Look at the source material itself. The special stages, all of them exist in some horrifying, psychedelic void. All of them disorienting. All of them seeming to replicate a place that can't make any sort of sense in any possible degree. Low poly birds, half pipes, a giant planet of checkerboarded brown and orange tiles with orbs. What the fuck is this place? I feel like I'm like frightened to like look into it. Like I don't know what this is supposed to represent. In what context does this exist in Sonic's world other than being a gameplay mechanic? Polygonal palm trees, mountains of pure rock, no plant life on them. Realistic pine trees accompanying white ancient marble ruins, more decadent empty mountains, a strange industrial area with a realistic town behind it. Again, purple. Why does this keep popping up? Why is this color consistently always making me on edge? Why does the word cope appear on this stage? Maybe this was just another phrase to accentuate the apathetic Gen X attitude of the audience playing, to just cope with the rootless, aimless meaninglessness of not only the land Sonic lives in, but the world that we also happen to inhabit most of the time. Seemingly, at least. I don't know what I'm saying. Labyrinth Zone gives us another unexplained romp through more ruins. An empty chamber of nameless faces. Maybe faces of people that used to exist. People that died long ago. Why did they disappear? Where did they go? I don't know. Starlight Zone is just uptown Manhattan in all its realistic glory. And Scrap Brain Zone. Look at this background. A polluted horror show. A rotted yellowish brown with, again, Blade Runner-like structures protruding through the air. Sonic has no choice but to wallow through this empty land, attempting to rid this island of the mechanical overlord that's pillaged this place for all it's worth. Throughout the entire classic series, Eggman and his badniks are the weirdly perfect juxtaposition. They themselves, amidst this weird, abstract land, are strikingly realistic compared to Sonic and his kin. It's equally as unsettling. This continues into Sonic 2. The hazy, drug-induced visuals are toned down. It's much brighter now, but still look at the aquatic ruin. Mystic Cave. Who made these structures? And why are Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Robotnik the only characters present in these places? It says in the Sonic 2 manual that Sonic's animal friends are being transformed into robots. So where the hell are they? Are they really talking about these guys? They look like actual animals, nothing like the talking sentient animals that we seem to follow in these games. In Sonic CD, there's even more structures. A perfect drugged out wonderland with no people in it. I'll give it a little bit more credit and say that it does make sense, at least in this game specifically. It's not too out of this world that Little Planet actually is uninhabited, which does explain why its environments are so hostile, making it even more horrifying when Eggman contorts them into being gritty, blood-red skied metropolises. Angel Island is the only place that contextualizes why there are abandoned structures littered among the complexion of the Isle, why Knuckles is the only resident here. As for West Side Island, South Island, hell, Little Planet as well, to an extent, there isn't a trace of a soul living here. I know that besides building the world, there's no reason to show much else other than the main characters. It's just not necessary for the stories these games are trying to tell. But regardless of that, what is communicated through the games alone is that Robotnik is the only human with access to these islands, and Sonic and Co. are strange enigmas walking amongst the wildlife of the region. In lots of other games, even the games that are of lesser graphical fidelity, NPCs are a common thing seen throughout the entire gaming industry at this time. It's not like you couldn't get it done, but in the Sonic series, it's an empty wasteland. No one is here. It's just Sonic. Maybe Tails. From a thematic standpoint, I do think that having Sonic occupy these ruined, overgrown environments makes the whole picture work. Sonic is working to preserve the unmitigated natural beauties that lay here, and I understand that. But the island hopping nature of the classic Sonic stories doesn't lend well to communicating what this world is supposed to truly be, what it has in it. All we see are gorgeous, natural forests, beaches, sparkling oceans, sapphire skies, weirdly realistic horizons of clouds. These islands burdened with the remains of a destroyed world. It all creates a kind of lost paradise. A place that, like all these games, images, and advertising has shown us, is unbounded by the outside world. It just exists, trudging along as if nothing happened, as if there wasn't some cataclysm that took place here. The apocalypse that echoed its reign over all who used to live here is a thing of the past. The records of these civilizations are dying, rotting away, fading away with the passage of time. All that truly stays is the life that still lives. The animals, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, a lost paradise. This ethereal uncanniness wasn't necessarily lost through the years, but I personally believe that its dark side, at least atmospherically, was yet to truly raise its head. I think Saturn-era Sonic is emblematic of it almost more than the Genesis games, but while the Genesis games offer a slice of tropical escapism, the Saturn era leans far more into the psychedelic impossibility of the visuals from Sonic 1, an unsympathetic, unloving wasteland. As stated before, Sonic didn't have any real presence on this console. Spin-offs, compilations, but nothing here really tried to break the mold of what the Genesis games had already established. What lay outside those tropical islands was mostly a mystery, unless you count that fun short from Sonic Jam. I'm fully aware that concerning the Japanese canon, there was never a notion that Sonic existed in a world without humans, without other real characters, that the world presented in the Genesis games was the only version of Sonic's world that existed. But for Americans, hell, most of the world probably, that lore bit clearly went over a lot of people's heads. And the next game I'm about to talk about exemplifies this. The aforementioned Sonic Extreme was made by American developers, so I can totally understand where they were coming from when they straight up just made Sonic stages take place in a fucking acid trip. Look at this. What the fuck is even going on here? Alright, let's calm down. The most up-to-date story outline for Sonic Extreme before it got cancelled was as follows. Robotnik has rebuilt his Death Egg Fortress, larger than Sonic's entire world. So powerful is its gravity that it can rip planets from their orbits. Already, several planets orbited the huge fortress. Robotnik would not rest until Sonic's world was in his clutches as well. Already the world is being drawn to the Death Egg. Sonic has to act quickly to stop Robotnik. Tails has managed to create a working teleport pod that can send Sonic to the Death Egg. There was no time to contact Knuckles, so Tails will stay behind and operate the teleport pod, and Sonic will travel to the heart of the Death Egg and destroy it. There's a little more to the story than that. You can read it here, but that's the general gist. So each of these levels are supposed to be entire planets. Alright, so that explains why everything looks like I'm in a late 90s acid-induced hell. But seriously, let's look at what I'm actually trying to communicate to you guys. These stages, they unnerve me. Sonic is all alone. No one is with him. No friends. Not even Eggman. Sonic is traversing these disorienting mazes, all textured with low-res 1990s computing power. Sonic himself lacks any sort of spirit or charisma. He looks off. Truly off. This is the Sonic that at least partly represents the Saturn era, and he frightens me to the core. Something about the lack of eyebrow ridges, the awkward idle animations, the dopey, even more awkward running animation, it feels like I'm looking at an imposter, a weird vector image of what's supposed to be Sonic, but it's not Sonic. It doesn't feel like him. This Sonic is a puppet. No will, no personality. In a way, this Sonic, even more than Greg Martin's interpretation, actually belongs here. In this soulless, empty void. He blends in here, in this distorted amalgamation of what people think Sonic's world looks like, and a gloomy, never-ending, purple sky, overlooking a lonely hedgehog running ceaselessly, aimlessly into an expanse of memories that just won't stop repeating. The world of Sonic Extreme, and Saturn-era Sonic's world as a whole, is one that kind of shows how confused Sega was on how to truly expand on the world they built in the first few games. Well, lack thereof. In the Genesis era, it seemed harmless, and somewhat intentful. They trickled and drip-fed us details on what Sonic's world actually consisted of. Sure, but by the time the rest of Sonic's competitors got to the 3D landscape, what was there to build on? And this frightening emptiness was present everywhere, in places like Sega World Sydney, Sega World London, places where Sonic's presence was smack dab in your face at all times. The London location was opened in 1996, Sydney in 97. When you look at the pictures of these places, there's a wash of fear that envelops me often. The main reason is simply because I know what Sonic's media presence was at the time, and it wasn't much. By 97, Sonic was in deep shit, figured to potentially be an outdated symbol of the few years Sega was a truly successful console manufacturer. Now, would I love to go here? Fucking yeah, look at it. But when you see the Japanese Sonic design with blue arms, hanging out with Sally Acorn, and Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog Eggman, stuff and designs that ran their course by 94, things really feel off. Like there's a very evident identity crisis here. Who was Sonic during this time? Was his world some lonely abstraction with beaches and checkerboarded floors that had no one in them? The uncanniness of what Sonic's world had become was just too noticeable. Look at Sonic R. Where are these locations? Look at the Tails doll. Just look at this image. The same checkerboarded floor, the same endless expanse behind it. It's almost like the art direction was eating itself, like the strangeness, the uncanniness I was talking about before was working against it. I think the worst culprit of this is Sonic Schoolhouse, yet another endless maze of mid-90s pre-rendered graphics with no emotion or direction, a stylistically bankrupt hellscape, permanently stuck in the era it was born in. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about just how scary this old guard Sonic aesthetic really is. It just doesn't feel right. It reminds me of a movement that was really popular when I was personally growing up. When I was little, and by little I mean 10 to 12, even 13, there was an interesting phenomenon that was going on called Vaporwave. The frightening part about Vaporwave was that it felt like it was anonymous, that someone, we don't know who, remixed some old 80s music or aesthetics and turned it into something else entirely, infused with nostalgic imagery and experiences, a trip of pure childlike ecstasy. A place where time does not pass, where everything can stay the same. There's a kind of suffocation that comes with that idea, a sense of impending madness that is sewn into the fabric of Vaporwave. It feels like I'm uncomfortable in my own nostalgia, in my own head, in my own memories, like my head is spinning. If memories that have already existed keep replaying over and over, how long until they begin degrading? Not only in value, but also in quality, like a VHS tape. To live in such a place where paradise is a never-changing column of comfort, it means your lifespan is numbered. I tend to stay away from Vaporwave as a whole. It's sorrowful, like there's regret in its DNA. A refusal to acknowledge reality as it is. It's fueled by the desire to escape. You sow nothing in the memories of yesteryear. All you can do with those memories is learn from them, to create a different reality for ourselves, a better one.
You're lost in thoughts, or in other words, concepts. And you're trying to make sense out of a conceptual world. And this world we live in, you've only got to look around you. Almost everything is the result of human thinking, human concepts, human creativity, rather than what you might call the more natural world of God. We live in an unnatural world. The real world is natural. What we live here is a sort of corrupted version of it. That's why it dies. But in the real world, the supernatural world, there is no death, no corruption, and no conceptualism. It's a world of God.
This is exactly what was at stake when Sega was deciding that Sonic needed a rebrand for the new millennium, a new audience, a new world that used the building blocks of the past to make something coherent in the present. This is where the Sonic Adventure series comes in, unifying the canon and finally attempting to solidify the world that Sonic actually lived in inside the games themselves, a task that required a lot of risks and a lot of changes, ones that ultimately I believe really paid off. But this video isn't about Sonic Adventure. It's about what came before. What happened to the eerie world Sonic used to live in for most of the 90s. While it personally unnerved me, made me feel like I was in danger, like I was being watched, and kind of made me scared of this version of the character, I have to recognize that this vision of Sonic, the distinctly un-Japanese version of the canon, is what a lot of people knew as Sonic. These barren, conquered, destroyed worlds were what defined Sonic for so long. Even in the Japanese canon, this lost paradise aesthetic and theme was very important in creating the look and feel of what we knew to love as the Blue Hedgehog's planet. But is there a piece of media that exists that has that same feeling, that same atmosphere, that feeling that you're standing at the edge of the world?
Kino!
憎いわ。
同じだな。何も変わらん。
Blue Submarine is an anime from 1998, based on the original manga of the same name from 1967. The world within it is a rusted, apocalyptic aquascape. The planet is flooded, and most of humanity is fighting to stay alive against the overwhelming might of New Age intelligent creatures that'll stop at nothing to drive humanity to extinction. It's been many years since I first watched the show. I was 15, I think, and it affected me pretty heavily in a way I didn't expect. The themes of humanity's longevity as a species amongst new dominant life forms of considerable intellect was really gripping. The world is completely destroyed, yet Earth is still so beautiful. It's flourishing, just without mankind. Our place in this kind of world is put into question. Maybe we should give up our spot on the food chain for the sake of these new species. Maybe we should accept this new chapter of Earth's history and be okay with realizing Earth is better off caring for these new creatures as its children, as opposed to fighting for the last scraps of a dying race already biting off the edge of extinction. Such a somber subject, a suffocating one. Yet, to see it play out, it leaves you with a weirdly bittersweet feeling, like everything will be fine, but at the cost of us. And maybe it makes sense like that. At least that's what I gathered from the show. It accomplishes the same unease that Sonic used to achieve. A lost, dysfunctional yet beautiful paradise with big puffy clouds crowding the blue shimmering scenery, this time with purposeful intent. Because of this feeling that classic Sonic tends to give me, at least classic American Sonic, I usually only involve myself with the Japanese canon, and only the Japanese canon. This was the canon that I grew up with. The canon and aesthetic that chose to evolve and change with the times. The one that develops its world past the nostalgic and gleeful island-hopping adventures that define the birth of this long-standing series. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that. We've been separated from the unification of the brand by about 25 plus years. 1998, God, it feels like an eternity. Yet, on a spreadsheet, it doesn't look like a big deal. I just wish that this lost paradise aesthetic still had one more shot, because it can be used to make something truly remarkable, at least in terms of world building. If something could mix the Japanese poppy-saturated classic Sonic sensibilities with this haunting apocalyptic setting, I think we could be looking at something really special here. Well, I'm here to tell you it does exist. It's existed for nearly 30 years now. The original video animation. While not perfect, I can firmly say it is a blast. This Sonic OVA was something that influenced me profoundly when I watched it for the first time. There is an aura to this film. Really, I mean it. I'm not joking. There's a lot of style when it comes to the visuals. The character designs are just as expressive and lively as that classic original artwork implies they are. There's a noticeable haze, an analog glow that emanates off of a lot of objects and locations within this film, whether it be windows, the precipitation of the rain falling before Metal Robotnik's frame, or the dazzling lights coming from Dr. Eggman's computer room. This isn't exclusive to this OVA. A lot of anime done with traditional cell animation has this effect. It can be done with digital animation, of course, but when it's analog, there's a level of detail that I think it captures better overall, a level of dimension that can't be replicated. The hand-painted images of Robotropolis and the rugged, overgrown, lived-in junkyard that is Sonic and Tails' home. This world is completely destroyed, The land of the sky is the new home of humanity. It's gorgeous. A paradise. Bright blue atmosphere, tropical climate, pearly lakes upon giant floating islands. Something you'd see in an old Dreamcast fishing game. Or even Sonic Adventure. Sonic's joint is made up of a destroyed present-day 747, as well as other contemporary technology. A space shuttle, a satellite, a train. Why is all this here of all places? It's all decaying, still homey of course, but decaying. The ruins that Sonic and Tails find are clearly remains of New York City. Some great apocalyptic event happened here that forced humans to retreat to the land of the sky. Maybe this event is what created these animal people. I don't know. There's a teenager with a cattail here. Something happened. The movie does an amazing job visually displaying this new world for all it's worth, while still not calling too much attention to the world's striking history. It doesn't explain how all this ended up here, but it gives you enough clues so that you can come up with your own conclusions. This is world building done really well. The art direction still keeps the style and dreamy charm of the Japanese Sonic canon, while choosing to do something original with it. It is beautiful to look at, and it's exactly what I'd imagine a Saturn-era Sonic story would look like. The perfect mix of realism and fantasy that Sonic should always have in my opinion. The saturated neon colors are complemented by the grounded environments. For me, visually speaking at least, it's perfect. The grit of the adventure games, the vibrance of the classics, blended perfectly. This is only superseded by an amazing soundtrack, one that mixes 90s electro and EDM to create a really exciting yet fitting soundscape to accompany every scene. The music choices really fit well in the film itself, which is weird since it's all dance music. I'll come out and say that this OVA is the perfect example of why these genres are some of my favorite to use in all of my creative endeavors, whether it be videos like this one here, or the films I make, even while I'm writing scenes in a novel format, a script format, whatever. This genre of music is nearly always the backing piece. Well, not always, but you get the point. This movie is why whenever I do hear electro, 90s techno, what have you, I don't always imagine action scenes. I imagine tough conversations, exposition, evil monologues, even when characters are deep in thought. Percussion-based electronic music, typically styled after the rhetoric of production from the 90s, can and will always work as a background piece. I think for me, the Sonic the Hedgehog OVA, maybe not necessarily in terms of writing, but in scope, style, atmosphere, and energy, is a piece of work that exemplifies what I want to tell stories about and how. I love this apocalyptic setting. I love the dark and gritty 90s anime aesthetic crossed with the spunky and fun tone. I love the electro, I love the colors, I love the eeriness, and I love Sonic the Hedgehog. I am proud to say I was one of the lucky few that did grow up watching this. I had it on VHS, and I remember that white tape like it was yesterday. It was the perfect movie to watch when I was tired after a long morning at church, and it's the perfect example of an aesthetic and atmosphere that doesn't have to frighten me to be valued, of a mysterious world forgotten by the world at large, a world that many people forgot existed at some point in time, in the wake of the 90s, but before Sega's swan song was casted into the world. The perfect example of Sonic in a Lost Paradise.